I did everything right and they indicted me.
And I don't know what the I'm doing.
Antifa!
Muted by the man once again. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Katie Halper Show. Thank you so much for coming to this special stream, which is Wednesday instead of Tuesday. But as people probably know, we usually stream every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Make sure you subscribe by hitting subscribe and then the bell so that you don't miss any of these streams. We do streams every Tuesday at 7 p.m. But then sometimes we do daytime streams. In fact, almost every week we do daytime streams Friday during the day. And that lets us talk to people in different parts of the world. So you'll definitely want to subscribe. We are at over 450,000 subs. So we definitely want to reach 475 by, I don't know, let's think of a good goal. You guys put in the comments. When do we want to reach that 475 goal? Also, please like the stream. That's a great way to fight back against the algorithmic suppression that happens. And if you haven't already, please do become Patreon supporters at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. And if you do that, when you do that, you get access to incredible bonus content, extended interviews, early release, behind the scenes content. If you do that at the $5 a month level, which is less than 25 cents a day, Monday through Friday. If you can't swing that, but you still want to make sure that this show continues, because we definitely couldn't do it without your support, you can become members at the $1 a month level. So that's literally $12 a year. So, and what's cool is if you join during the show, I will read your name during the show. Let's see. We actually got someone already. What time was that? 1 minute ago. Amazing. We got someone. Someone named Tina. So thank you so much, Tina, for becoming a $5 a month level. Wow. That is so great. Okay. We have an amazing show coming for you right now. We have in reverse order, Craig Mokhiber, Greg Stoker, and first and foremost, I shouldn't say first and foremost. That sounds very unfair to the other guests. First and equally amazing, because all of our guests on the show tonight are amazing. We have Jamal Abdi of NIAC, which is the National Iranian-American Council. Welcome back to the show, Jamal.
Thank you for having me on.
Of course. Good to see you as well. Want to start off by asking you about this deal and what your thoughts are on it and general impressions. And then, of course, we actually have this allegedly leaked copy of what CNN says is the current memorandum of understanding between the U.S. and Iran, which is going to be signed on Friday in Switzerland, apparently. Have you had a chance to see that yet?
Yeah.
If not, we can throw it on the screen. Okay.
I mean, I've read 8 different versions of this thing,
okay,
but apparently this is the real one.
Yeah. So let's start off by taking a look at that, and then you want to respond to it?
Sure, yeah.
Great. Okay. So here's some of the most important things. I'm just going to condense it. So it includes an immediate and permanent end to the war on all fronts, including Lebanon. Undertake that from now on, they will not launch any hostile action against each other and will refrain from the threat or use of force against each other, respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and refrain from interfering in each other's internal affairs. It also calls for the U.S. to lift the naval blockade, the removal of technical obstacles from the Strait of Hormuz, and the neutralization of mines by Iran, the termination of sanctions against Iran, that Iran will, quote, never produce nuclear weapons, that in light of the progress of negotiations toward a final agreement, frozen or restricted funds and assets of the Islamic Republic of Iran will be released and made fully available. So what do you make of this?
Most of this is conditional. And, if you parse this, a lot of this is not decided yet. There's sort of these aspirational, aspirational unfreezing of assets, this investment fund, $300 billion investment fund, which I think is, I'm surprised by how much different this is than what Donald Trump has been talking about and the way he's been, articulating his Iran policy. Like, this is actually a document that I think a lot of people are going to attack it because of these vague promises it's making that are not actually going to be executed until the actual negotiations take place towards a final deal. And so it leaves a lot on the table to be decided. And I really am concerned that a lot of that may not come to fruition because of the political atmosphere here in Washington. A lot of this is already getting attacked. A lot of Democrats are kind of jumping on this, let's just attack it because it's Trump. And I get it to some extent, because you don't want to say that this is a great deal and the war is how we got to this deal.
Right.
But a lot of people are just sort of taking the sort of like right-wing anti-Obama deal framework and now saying, aha, see, now we're the ones that get to say you have the bad deal.
Right.
So anyway, but I do think it's very interesting on a couple fronts that, first of all, it talks about this new version that has come up. This wasn't in the previous versions, but it does talk about essentially Iran controlling the Strait of Hormuz and working with Oman on a system, sort of not in so many words, but acknowledging that Iran is going to potentially be charging fees for passage. And it does say in accordance with international law, but it acknowledges that. So that, to me, that is a significant climb down from where we were a little while ago. I mean, it's certainly a climb down from where we were before the war.
Right.
It talks about, well, I think the big quote unquote concession is that it lifts the oil sanctions on Iran, and not just sort of like in a limited way, but it's talking about lifting not just the sale of the oil not being sanctioned, but the banking, the transactions, the insurance. So a very comprehensive waiver to the sanctions. And now that originally we were hearing that was going to be a 60-day waiver, which I think the estimates are Iran could generate about $8 billion from that. This document now that we're seeing, it basically says this waiver is going to be in place until we reach a final deal where all the sanctions are lifted. So I think this is all, I mean, first of all, I think a lot of people are going to process this through that same lens that we had during the JCPOA, which is as if this is an accounting challenge, as if, the strategic landscape in the Middle East is a question of dollars in and dollars out. If we cut off this many dollars from Iran, then this much terrorism is going to stop. But if we give them money, then that's going to, and it's just, it's nonsense. This is, I think the bottom line here is this MOU gets us out of not just this war that had the potential to become a quagmire, it potentially gets us out of a strategic quagmire that the United States has been in for decades in the Middle East, in which we have, for years given Israel everything it wants, a blank check, really to Israel's own detriment. To some extent, the same could be said for, the Saudis and the GCC states. And it really was, in Trump's first term, where he didn't strike Iran after Iran had struck Saudi oil facilities, and there was a sort of awakening among the Arab GCC states that the U.S. wasn't just going to cut blank checks and give it this sort of free hand to behave as an irresponsible actor. And I think that really sobered up the decision makers there. That, okay, we actually can't live in this fantasy land where essentially the U.S. is providing the net as we walk on this tightrope. We actually have to figure out a way to share the region and have peace. And I think this war has really sobered up the GCC states. But the same has not happened for Israel. And this is potentially the beginning of something like that, which, the pro-Israel advocates are going to cry and scream that it's this betrayal. But, for a long time, the way we talked about the JCPOA was, and saying no to baby striking Iran and the U.S. Supporting it was, when you have a friend who's a drunk driver, you have to take away the car keys. And we just have not done that. This deal potentially puts us in a position where that starts to happen, and not in a way that blows everything up, but actually, having a diplomatic process to change our strategy. And that is really fundamentally what this is about. We hear Trump, I don't know if you have the clips from the press conference he gave today, but he's talking rationally, whereas I think the past several months on this topic, at least, he's been talking very ideologically. And today it's like a total reversal. And now he's saying really common sense things like, well, we can't take away Iran's missiles and expect that that's realistic when Saudi and all the other countries have missiles. We can't take away their missiles. That's just not realistic. And these are things that, we've been saying for years, other, rational realists and, ordinary people say it. But in DC, this is like a shibboleth that you should not cross. And he's actually now saying those things. So I think that's interesting. And I hope that, though, that the political response to this isn't one that suffocates any opportunity to actually build on this into something that is comprehensive and that can be the beginning of a new approach to the region where at least most of the states now acknowledge we have to figure out how to work together because the alternative is this war that is just a disaster for all of us. And I think that's really possible, but the politics here are going to dictate a lot of that.
Well, you mentioned some more ideological clips of Trump, some more rational clips. So let's just present some of these. So this one I would say is not that rational. Here's a clip of Trump talking about Obama's deal. This is from Wednesday during a press conference with Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. So this is A2, Brad.
Reported that it includes its $300 billion reconstruction fund funded by Gulf allies. That's false?
It's false. People, you can invest if you want. I mean, what am I going to do? Say nobody's ever allowed to invest? No, we're not investing. We're not putting up 10 cents. And people can decide to do that, but that's up to them. We are not investing in it, and we do not have a fund. But nobody could have made this deal. I mean, the JCPOA done by Obama, he handed him $1.7 billion in cash, gave him hundreds of millions of dollars, gave him billions and billions of dollars, but he gave him $1.7 billion in cash, green cash from banks, into a Boeing 757 and flew it into Iran. And they stood at the plane. I have pictures of it like, oh my God, look at this money he's giving us. He tried to bribe his way out. I didn't do that. Nobody mentions that. 1.7 billion and hundreds of millions of dollars. They tried to bribe their way out of it. And you know what the Iranians did? They laughed at Obama and they said he's a stupid son of a bitch. Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, so what's your response to that?
I mean, the great ones have to play the old hits. I think, he gets stuck in this cycle of, attacking the previous deal. And what's really ironic is these are the attacks he is now going to have to fight against to get his own deal. And we'll see how he gets out of that. I mean, and I think a lot of people who want to see peace are going to be in this position of having to say, well, this is better than the JCPOA and this or that. But come on, the reality is this is a version of the JCPOA. Some of the dynamics are different, but the fundamental bargain here is that realistically, the way to deal with the nuclear issue is through, verification and providing incentives. And I think Trump has always understood that you can't have a deal without incentives, without any benefit for the person on the other end of it. And so, I think that we're gonna see this sort of Jekyll and Hyde thing with him, where on one hand he's attacking the Obama deal, and then on the other side of his mouth he's having to defend a very similar approach to the Iran issue. Right.
Yeah. Well, let's just keep some of these hits going, as you called them. Let's see. We also have. Here is, you urge caution, right? Because who knows what will happen to this deal. But we also have Trump during a different press conference at the G7 in France on Wednesday. He's asked whether or not this agreement is final. Let's watch that. A03, Brad.
Read it and you can see. And it's a memorandum of understanding. If it doesn't get done in 60 days, that's all right. We go back to bombing. I don't want to do that because...
Look at Rubio. He looks very upset that there's even a pause in bombing. I hope he was sitting down when he heard about this. Look at that face.
It's so good. But we might have to, because we're never going to let them have a nuclear weapon. But they've agreed not to, and you'll see that very clearly in the agreement.
So what's your response to that?
Well, I mean, first of all, you're playing all the bad clips.
I know. Sorry. We'll find a good one. Those aren't entertaining, the good ones.
Yeah, that's true. That's why that's why people love him, I guess. Right. But first of all, I think it was the first or second point in the memorandum talks about not threatening to attack one another.
Right.
So he's immediately violating those terms,
Right.
which I do think raises a really important point. I think there's a lot of unspoken agreements in this memorandum. You know, the way it talks about releasing Iran's frozen funds, you know, its own money that has been locked up by sanctions. It doesn't really articulate how that's going to happen. It sort of kicks it down the road, but then we've heard a lot of things about unspoken agreements. We've heard about, you know, when Israel bombed Beirut on the eve of the deal being complete to try to torpedo it, and Iran was ready to go to strike back, and Trump somehow talked them down and said that he had given some concessions. And a lot of people understand that to mean that there's going to be a full release of those funds at some point before a final deal. That's not articulated in the agreement. So I think that it's a risky proposition. And you see that he's violating sort of the written terms of the agreement. And then there are these unwritten terms that we'll see sort of how it plays out. I also think, I mean, just with Rubio, I think that's really interesting because I think we are starting to potentially see the beginnings of the 2028 GOP primary with Vance as the peace candidate and Rubio as the hawk. And I'm sure there's lots of palace intrigue that will unfold over the weeks to come. But just how, you know, the two are sort of positioning themselves, I think, is really interesting. And you see people who are afraid to attack Trump, they're attacking
Right.
JD Vance instead.
Right. That's always interesting, the proxy attack. Well, Jamal, since you are so fair and balanced, and you did say that there were some rational moments of Trump, here he is. Don't want to deprive you and our audience of that. Here he is talking about Iran's ballistic missiles, and you referred to that.
You don't mind Iran having ballistic missiles? Can you elaborate on that? I want to make sure we understand your position.
So he said, the journalist said, you don't mind Iran having ballistic missiles. I want to make sure we understand your position.
I'm saying that if other countries have them, it's a little bit unfair for them not to have some. A ballistic missile is not the same thing as what we're talking about when we talk nuclear. But if Saudi Arabia and Qatar and they all have some, I would say in relative proportion, I think it's okay. That's what I mean.
What happened? How did that happen?
You know, he decided he didn't have to toe the company line, and, you know, didn't have to cling to the BB talking points that I think he probably understood or totally unrealistic, but he thought that by blustering he could, you know, force a better deal on Iran. And clearly the rope has run out, and he's now coming to terms with reality and where we are today. I think he said something similar about enrichment, even, which I think that's the biggest kind of, I mean, God forbid, you know, 180 or flip flop. But Trump, when he came into office a second time, was talking about, look, I just want a deal that ensures no nuclear weapons. And that was widely read as, okay, this is a pragmatic position. This is sort of like the Obama position of, okay, they have a right to enrichment, fine. We can put the guardrails in place so that doesn't mean enriching to a bomb. Then at some point, really, actually, it was during the negotiations last year when Witkoff talked about, you know, well, Iran, they can enrich up to 3.5%. That's totally reasonable. And then they got hit from Republicans in the Senate. They got hit by AIPAC. And within hours, Witkoff had to go and issue a correction and say that we're against enrichment. And Trump started talking about zero enrichment. And that was sort of when the prospect of a deal, I think, completely evaporated for a time, because that zero enrichment demand has prevented deals, you know, a resolution to this issue since the George W. Bush administration. Now he's come back to reality. And I think, you know, I'll have to double check to make sure this is true, but he made similar comments about enrichment, saying that, well, look, if we're going to say no enrichment to Iran and there's others in the region who are enriching, that's just not tenable. And that can only be, you know, a reference to Israel. And I think that's really shocking.
Right. Yeah. You made a great statement you released a great statement at NIAC. And that's A4, Brad, because let's show that. Because if you thought Trump was rational, wait till you see this one. So I'm just going to quote from some parts of that. You say, while reaching the finalization of an agreement is long overdue relief from the nightmare of war, it also makes us ask, what was it all for? As best we can tell, precious little. The war was started based on lies that were immediately proven false. Thousands of innocent people were killed and injured in horrific ways, starting with the bombing of Shajare Tabia School in Manab, with much worse civilizational level destruction threatened. We should all know now that war is not liberation, that those who were settling it as a path to freedom and security were charlatans paving a path to misery and death. And in fact, some of these people who are calling for war as liberation have made themselves very vocal in various venues. And while these negotiations are underway, the FIFA World Cup held in the US, are happening. And the Iranian team has been refused the right to stay in the country and are getting hassled going in and out, with some staff members even being denied entry. The head coach, Amir Galanoi, sorry, I don't know how to say that, Galanoi, called them the, quote, most oppressed team in the World Cup. And you attended a World Cup game, right? Correct? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I went to the first game, Iran, New Zealand, in Los Angeles, and I mean, it was great. I wish that Iran had got the win. I think they actually really needed to win that game, but so be it. But it was interesting. LA, largest Iranian diaspora population in the world, also home to some of the sort of more hawkish Iranian-American communities. We did a survey during the 2024 elections where we called the entire voter file of Iranian Americans and asked the question, should the next president make preventing war with Iran a priority? And every single county, this is Iranian Americans, every single county in the country the majority said yes, except for Beverly Hills and Great Neck, New York. So this is, there's a large Iranian Jewish population that tends to be more pro-Israel, very, hawkish on these things. There's a strong sort of monarchist, persuasion out there. And, it's sort of, I think of LA a little bit as a place that has been incubated where kind of the old politics continued to play out for many years, even as the rest of the world moved on. And as we came back to this revitalism of monarchism as a legitimate movement for Iran, it really exploded there. And so all that being said, I think a lot of people were wondering what is going to happen at that game. What kind of protests are there going to be? What kind of abuse against the players are we going to see? And I think we clearly saw a decent amount of that. There were protesters outside. There were people inside the stadium, some with Israeli flags, other with flags that can be identified as supporting the monarchy, although it's a historic flag for Iran. But by and large, when we got in the stadium, everybody was there to support the team and the players. And I thought it was really interesting that, during the anthem, the Iranian, the Islamic Republic anthem, there were, I think, majority boos. I mean, loud boos. And I was a little surprised just because it seemed like there was such a positive atmosphere. People booed the anthem and then cheered the team and cheered the players. And I thought, isn't that interesting that we have been told online and anytime we're engaged in political activities as Iranian Americans, we get shouted down if we don't adhere to, you have to support the return of the Shah. Otherwise, you're a regime apologist, and it's black and white. There's no nuance. Either you support the war or you support, the worst crimes of the IRGC. And real people actually can hold two ideas at the same time. And it can actually approach these things with nuance that, okay, I don't like the government, but I support the team. I support the nation of Iran. I support the people of Iran. And if you look online, there's plenty of clips of these protesters. I'm not so sure that it was a smart move for FIFA to say that we're going to ban the flag from being carried. And I think that created more controversy than was legitimate. But the way that the protesters were haranguing people and threatening and even starting fights and kind of the nastiest kind of language at people and trying to provoke people, trying to provoke a fight. I do think that if that sort of activity was happening in the stands, in the stadium, it could have been really, messy and there could have been violence. So I'm a little bit of two minds with that. But I think the bottom line is just that, this community has been so politicized. I think, I don't even blame people who have been brainwashed to think that the U.S. is going to bomb Iran into a democracy that Reza Pahlavi flies in. And, these people have been misled. And they've been misled not just by organic, Shah supporters and things like that. There is a campaign to turn the Iranian-American community and the Iranian diaspora into just another extension of the Israel lobby, just another group that polices the speech of the majority of their community and the majority of Americans and tries to stifle any sort of debate from happening. And it turns out that you can astroturf a campaign like that online. You can maybe convince people to silence themselves and not participate in public debate. But in real life, people are much more complex and nuanced than that. And the feeling at that game was not one of we're protesting and we're supporting the war. It was a sense of reprieve that we had been through this horrible war. Our community had been so politicized and so much fighting. And here we finally were together, able to actually celebrate something that we could all stand behind. And I think that's really important because that is what this campaign has aimed to dismantle, to dismantle any shared sense of identity among Iranians and Iranian Americans, any sense of, of unity and sort of a national project, unless it was aimed at war, regime change, the Shah, all these things. And it was very nice to be able to celebrate something that we could all share and kind of that transcended these divisions that people are trying to put on us.
Right. Well, let's take a look, not to be a downer, but I think it's maybe worth looking at one of these clips. Let's see, a clip of an altercation, but this is A5, Brad, between an Iranian national team fan and Iranian team fans during the game against New Zealand. So let's watch. All right, so here you get a sense of it. And there was another altercation where you some people from Mexico intervened. Your colleague Ethan wrote about this at his own Substack. But so, I mean, what are your thoughts about this? And how do you distinguish between duped people and cynical people?
Between
philosophical question, but yeah.
But
when I say cynical, I mean duped people who are brainwashed and people who know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah. I mean, even if somebody's brainwashed, that doesn't give you license to do the kind of stuff that they were, doing. And the bottom line, so.
No, of course, yeah.
This whole game to me was a microcosm of what our community has been going through, where on the political side of things, we've always said, there is this campaign to turn Iranians against one another so that we can't actually build power. And that is the Islamic Republic of Iran does that sort of thing. This is just classic, tactics for keeping people from being able to challenge the status quo or challenge power. But that is what has happened, in the diaspora, where instead of, and so I think this is a microcosm of that. Instead of us uniting to cheer the team on and to be able to be a part of this shared project, we're turned against one another to fight one another. And really, that was a very close game. I think if the team had been able to stay in the United States, I think if they hadn't been, had to deal with all the BS that they had to deal with, including from some of the, folks in the diaspora, mean, who knows? I don't want to
They
blame.
would have slept
Yes.
better. They would have had better quality sleep, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's an old team, and they were tired at the end. You could see it. You could see it with how they're acting. But there's this phenomenon. I mean, I don't know. I think I brought this up last time on the show, but there was that book in the early 2000s, "What's the Matter with Kansas?" And it was about
by Thomas Frank.
Yeah. So why do voters in the heartland vote against their economic interests? And it's because these culture war issues get exploited to convince them to actually vote against what is best for them. And that's exactly what happens here. People have been convinced that, the best way to get freedom for Iranians is to protest the national team and to call our friends and neighbors who disagree with us terrorists and regime this and all these things. And at the end of the day, what does it lead to? It leads to people, ICE rounding up, innocent Iranians and deporting them, and people in our own community cheering that. There's there was famously one of the earliest victims of ICE was this pro-Trump Iranian-American who was detained and deported, and her husband was asked, well, so now what do you think about your vote? And he was like, we still support Trump. And it's so, counter our own interests, but the sort of the trauma and the emotions within the community have been exploited to convince us, it's healthy for us, instead of celebrating this team or, let's fight each other in the stands. Let's scream at each other about what flag we're wearing. And it's a very effective political project. But now it has met up with reality. And I think, this war and, the fact that all the promises that were made have been completely broken. The reality has set in, and my hope is this fever has sort of broken. And my sense, notwithstanding some of these clips and some of the harassment, largely that happened outside of the stadium, I do think that this spell is starting to be broken. And my hope is we're not, I think we're entering this really important moment where there's going to be this political battle where the Israel lobby is going to be fighting for its life to try to prevent this deal from coming true. And they are certainly going to try to get Iranian faces to say, no, we don't think we think sanctions relief is bad. Like, people in Iran are suffering not just because of their own government, but because of the sanctions that are impoverishing them. And somehow we have people who claim to stand with them saying that it's a bad thing if sanctions get lifted on them. It's a bad thing if Iran, that has been bombed and massive destruction, that there should be a $300 billion financing plan to reconstruct the country. That's somehow bad for people. And it's just this, convincing people to work against their own self-interest because their emotions have been manipulated, and this, these culture war issues are being exploited to get them to do that. And that's exactly what we've seen.
Yeah, and you see that in Cuba too. Of course, sometimes there are people who, like the Iranian people, just like the Cuban people, are not a monolith, right? So there are times when people are doing stuff against their own interests, and then there are other times where their interests don't necessarily line up. So
that's true. That's true. And I think the difference is that everybody does have some shared belief that, like life in Iran should be better. People should, there are some basic things we agree on. There is, of course, iterations of different aspects, but even on those basic things, instead of having a debate about it, which can be healthy and actually lead to better policies, instead it's, oh, you're a terrorist, you're a, this or that.
I mean, I know more about Cuba than Iran, but it does seem to me that there are some Cuban Americans who really would be fine with like the entire island being obliterated. Like they don't have that affection. They speak about it, but they don't actually want things to improve there. I guess they would say, to play literal devil's advocate, right? They would say, well, things have to get hard so that they can overthrow the government and then everyone will be happy. I guess that would be their response to me. But
right. And I thought it was, this thing about, this is a few weeks old, but that the plan was for Ahmadinejad to be the new king of Iran.
Yeah.
But ironically, in 2009, there was the Green Movement, the disputed election, and a lot of these, these folks who believe that it has to get worse so that it can get
Right.
better were actually very pro Ahmadinejad winning, because they were fearful that this reformist would win and then actually have a way to bring the country into a place where it wasn't going to explode. And we definitely do have that here, but it's just, it's hard to get into the psyche
Right.
of somebody like that, because, okay, we've seen the war. I mean, that's you
Right.
know, it's rare that you actually get to see your bad idea play out.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's also very difficult to then climb down from that hill and say, okay, I was wrong. But that's where we are. I mean, what is the advice? Is it that Trump should have continued the war, that we should have put boots on the ground? Like,
Yeah.
what is the thing that they're now saying? And if you look to the people who are actually articulating the policy here, not just the people on the front lines carrying out the politics of it, you know, they really just want to go back. Okay, let's just go back to the status quo. We'll just go back to maximum pressure. They're really afraid that they've sort of lost the game here, and that there is going to be this complete shift in the approach to Iran that I think is the worst nightmare for. I mean, really, it's the worst nightmare for the right in Israel, the Netanyahu, and really, I mean, right now, the entire political system in Israel. They're much more worried about the U.S. Allowing Iran to become a normal country and sort of allowing for the politics within the country actually playing out in a way that Iran can realize its position in the region, and so they are scrambling to try to prevent that from happening. But they don't have any ideas. It's not like, well, we should have done the war better. They're not quite there yet. They're just saying, okay, let's just go back to the sanctions because that was working out so great, even though that made the war inevitable.
Right, exactly. And civilians suffer. I mean, they always pretend that it's hitting the government, affecting the government. Everyone who studies sanctions knows that's not true. But again, that's a fun game, like ignorant or evil. So we should do that with a bunch of characters. Next time you come on, we'll do that. Jamal, thank you so much for joining. Any final things that you want to say before we wrap?
No, go Team Melly.
Yeah.
Hopefully we take a victory and make it to the knockout round where there may be a U.S.-Iran match if they both play second. And so the political fireworks in D.C. around this deal and the World Cup will meet, and it'll be exciting, but it's also going to be messy. But let's hope that we see the teams move on.
Messy, the adjective, not the soccer player.
Not the soccer player.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so impressed that I know that. I know nothing about sports, so thank you, everyone, for indulging me. Well, thank you, Jamal. Have a great night, and see you soon. And
thank you.
Anaya. Great. Bye. All righty. Give this stream a thumbs up if you haven't already. That was great, and we are going to bring on our next guest. You know him and you love him. Make sure, by the way, because we don't usually stream on Wednesdays, we want to make sure everyone knows about the stream. So tweet it out, like it, subscribe, call your in-laws, call your enemies, your besties, whatever. Send a pigeon to them, tell them to tune in because we want to make sure that people are watching. Okay, so bring on Greg Stoker, former United States Army Ranger with a background in special ops and human intelligence collection. He's also running for Congress to represent Texas's 31st district. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Thank you for coming on. It's always so important, I think, to hear from you. It's really important, I think, in perspective to hear from anti-war veterans, because you kind of know it from the inside, but you also have the decency to reject that. So before we get into any specifics, do you have any general thoughts that you want to share on this memorandum of understanding?
Beyond the fact that it doesn't seem like it was born to live for very long, and even if it did, there's some other problems down the line that we can definitely talk about. If this does go through and the Iranian government has its sanctions lifted and it's open to like the free market, we're going to see like them trying to pull like a Venezuela or what they're trying to do in Cuba, which is to like flood the market probably through Gulf states, who want a better like business relationship with Iran in order to forestall Iran attacking them in the future in case Israel goes rogue, to like flood their markets with private capital and other interests, because they've spent a long time building resilience against that. I don't really have more to say about that, but it's something that, when it comes to the Imperial Handbook, there's not a lot of different plays, right? So you got the sanctions. If that doesn't work, try to destroy whatever alternative banking or economic system that they have, spark a popular uprising, if not just a 2-week ground operation that lasts 20 years. Who knows? So it's not that like sophisticated, but there's a lot of hijinks that they could still pull going forward. But that is even under the extreme hypothetical that this memorandum of understanding is going to last 60 days, where Israel doesn't just bomb the hell out of Lebanon, which is obviously a red line for Iran. And if they concede to that, they'll probably tolerate until the signing. But after the signing, it's going to be harder and harder for them politically to do that, or they'll lose a lot of diplomatic leverage. So we could talk about Israeli politics, how much Netanyahu doesn't want this, how even the quote unquote left in Israel is having an apocalyptic meltdown over this, which I can completely understand why from their perspective. But yeah, it's been a wild week. I mean, we could say that for the past 3 years. These news cycles are insane. So yeah, but thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. You made actually, I want to ask you something. Why is like Lebanon is a red line for Iran? I've seen some people on Twitter, some Palestinians, complain about Gaza not being a red line. Do you have any insights into why that is?
Well, first of all, the relationship between like Hamas and Iran is completely different. It's a completely different strategic and tactical situation as well. Like, they really don't have the capacity to like fund Hamas. They can't control or influence Hamas in the same way they can Hezbollah. And, you know, because of the apartheid system in Israel, it's really hard to access, like, communicate with the political entity inside of Gaza. You know, of course, they have their like foreign bureau that does like most of the ceasefire negotiations, but it's, I mean, like the amount of influence and control that Iran can assert over their quote unquote proxy. They're not a proxy,
right.
You know, that's the media narrative. But yeah, it's just that's one of the main reasons. Just like, how would you do that? How, during like sensitive diplomatic negotiations between like two rival great powers, Iran's becoming like a fourth order power right now, or a regional quote unquote hegemon, how would you be able to influence and control that actor that you need to use and good, or at least disavow during these negotiation processes? You know, it's just like not a controllable actor, or not necessarily like a reasonable actor. It's like there's just no communication. It's very difficult. It's also the most surveilled stretch of land on Earth. So that's an entire intelligence liability if you're trying to communicate with different factions for different like global negotiations. It just seems insane that you would even try to add that. Now, there's open lines and liaison officers inside of Lebanon, you know, with Hezbollah, and that's way easier.
Right. That's actually funny. And I mean, it's interesting because it's like, oh yeah, there's such, because they always say, the media and the, you know, Israel supporters always call, they say like Iran is behind Hamas, right? And that they're proxies. And it's like, oh, well, that's true. They probably would incorporate them more into their diplomatic demands. So that's a fascinating point that you just made. So I wanted to ask you about something that you actually made a video about this deal on Instagram, and you noted how well the stock market has responded to news about this deal and the way that Trump has played this in his favor. So let's take a look at a video of Trump making kind of a similar point during a press conference he had at the G7 on Wednesday. That's B01.
At the same time, with this announcement, or close to it, as people started to think it was going to happen when Iran was making some very positive statements, the stock market has surged to record highs, picking up thousands of points over the last short period of time, thousands of points. And oil is dropping like it has never dropped before, at levels that went in numbers down $7, down $8. They've never seen anything like that. But if we didn't do this deal, we could have dropped more bombs for another 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 years. You would never have the Hormuz Strait open. You would never have success. Your market would have, instead of going up at levels that nobody's ever seen before, would go down at levels that nobody ever saw before, maybe except for 1929 or whatever.
Oh, sorry. What's your response to that?
A whole lot to unpack there, right?
Yeah.
Also in that same speech, he says we have like 4 weeks of strategic reserves left. I'll note a small supply chain problem. Like, since there hasn't been a lot of traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, like, it doesn't just magically open and these like 100,000 ton amphibious cities just like instantly deliver it to the refineries. You know, there's going to be like a 6 week to 60-day backlog, which is the same amount of time potentially as the memorandum of understanding. Then you have to refine it. Then you have to do all this. So yeah, you know, oil prices might look okay today, in futures or whatever, but there's still going to be like third and fourth order supply chain ramifications from this. And it's not just like oil and everyone's car starts to run. It's also petroleum products. It's also fertilizer. It's also the helium that goes into our chip factories in South Korea and Taiwan, which we already have a supply chain bottleneck on for expanding compute and AI data centers in the continental United States. So first of all, that's the first thing to unpack. It's not like it's magically open, everything's going to be chill now, because it's not, even if the price of oil and oil futures is going down. You know, we've seen for the past 15 weeks, is it now 16 weeks? I feel like I'm living in a time vortex. Every Friday, he said he has made some grand boisterous threat. And then Sunday says it's been resolved. They've completely capitulated, or Monday morning before the markets open. So every weekend, I think with like 2 exceptions, it's been this pattern. I was kind of surprised that they've accepted even the premise of this memorandum of understanding, but they have. And so, yeah, so it's kind of true that the stock market's up objectively. It's also incredibly bizarre to act like this is in any way some sort of like victory and he actually did something. So he's not going to get a lot of pushback from the G7. You know, they just want the Strait open because Europe's like under like an energy crisis precipice. It's already there. So there's also too many systemic issues with the memorandum of understanding for going through. Like, okay, great. We how many times during this administration do we have to start a ceasefire process, or, you know, say some sort of deal or tariff plan is solidified just for it to like pull a 180 at the last possible worst possible moment. It's kind of a trend. This is kind of why it's now been reported that the Iranian negotiation team has, you know, clinical psychologists on there to profile President Trump.
Wow.
I don't think he's a completely irrational actor, but, you know, his positions change because he doesn't have any firm, like, steadfast ideology. He's not an ideological actor like, say, Marco Rubio.
Right.
Yeah, so it kind of like flips and it flops. And we also know, let's never forget, that Trump has famously and notoriously used the cover of diplomatic process as a tool of political assassination.
Right.
And so is Israel. Like,
yes,
was last year Israel assassinated the negotiation team that is now working with the Trump administration to get this deal through, this memorandum of understanding. There's like legitimate rogue actors involved in this. I don't think Iran is one of them.
Right.
I think it's the administration and whatever the heck Israel is going to get up to.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to put like anything past them, Israel. And then I guess the US in enabling it. But, you know, I mean, I think it's worth, I think that the discussion of US change on Israel and the America's like Trump's chiding of Netanyahu has been exaggerated, and we know that this is political theater and it's worth it for both of them, for both like Trump and Netanyahu, to say like Trump yelled at Netanyahu, right? Because then Trump gets
the dynamic that they've got going with their own respective domestic audiences is, first of all, can we stop falling for it? Remember when the Biden administration like leaked to Barack Ravid over at Axios News that Biden called on a heated phone call a bad effing guy, and everyone's like, whoa, it's really going to turn this whole thing around. Well, that was years ago. So I won't really hold my breath. So now,
and we know that similarly, Ravid, the same guy at Axios, talks about, you know, Trump saying what the F is wrong with this guy, or what the F is wrong with you to Netanyahu. But
I mean, that outlet's kind of like a White House and
Yeah.
Tel Aviv stenographer.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
they do some good
Yeah.
reporting, but they also just report whatever is leaked to them as well. So, anyways,
and of course, just one thing to bring up is like, we know actually if you are mad, what you do, which is what Ronald Reagan did, is you get on the phone and you tell Israel to stop. And that's what happened in Lebanon, where he famously like told Begin that it was a Holocaust, what they were doing. And again, I'm not saying this to give Reagan credit. I'm just showing what the possibilities are, the options are when you actually want to stop something.
Yeah. So Trump is getting some support back for finally starting to quote unquote stand up to Tel Aviv. Whereas now Netanyahu, who's now in a really existential political fight for his future, perhaps to remain out of jail, he's also deeply unpopular in a large chunk of Israel. He's saying, I am the only politician who can now and will now stand up to Trump.
Right.
So they're like, why are we buying this? Especially when the White House and this like Secretary of like Defense and Congress, which is controlled by MAGA loyalists, are literally trying to integrate the industrial and cyber warfare base of the United States and Israel. Like, why are we still falling for all of these contradictions?
So I want to show you a video of the thing that people are falling for. But I haven't actually covered this. I keep meaning to, and it's such a big deal. Actually, how about we do this? I'm going to play a video and then you'll respond to it. And in your response, can you go over this insane merging that you just referred to? So here's video of Trump acting out, pretending to act out against Netanyahu. And this, again, as we were saying, it's great for their respective domestic audiences. So here he is talking about Israel's decision to bomb Beirut over the weekend.
We had this deal done. You had a deal that was going to give them legally a nuclear weapon. And if that happened, Israel would have been blown away. And in all fairness to Bibi Netanyahu, who happens to be a good man, gets a little excited sometimes. But he happens to be a very good man. We've had an amazing partnership. He's been an amazing prime minister. We have a little dispute over Lebanon. I say, you can do a little softer touch, Bibi. You don't have to knock down a building every time somebody walks into it that's from Hezbollah. But it's been an amazing partnership. But he will say, we're the big partner and he's the very small partner, and that's true. So he came to the country and he begged Barack Hussein Obama, the president, not to do the JCPOA.
All right. So what's your response to this? There's so much to unpack here.
Well, first of all, there's the infantilization of Netanyahu, which I guess I kind of like enjoyed in some level. Like, he's just a really excitable, genocidal boy who needs to stop bombing every building. And it just goes to show you that, he is apprised by the ODNI and briefed by the CIA like every morning. He knows exactly what's going on. He knows that they're just completely denuding the south of Lebanon of all life and historic monuments and graveyards and any culture that wasn't like some sort of messianic Zionist cult. But, we're still incredibly integrated. He can talk all of this about how, the Israeli military is unchecked or Netanyahu's unchecked, but it's under his administration, the National Defense Authorization Act for the fiscal year 2027, so starting next year, has a section that was kind of like snuck in, Section 224. Ro Khanna and Thomas Massey are now trying to put an amendment into it that will abolish Section 224, but the section is called the United States Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative. So it basically requires the Secretary of Defense to appoint an executive agent, probably some billionaire, to synchronize the defense industrial integration, joint research, and co-production of weapon systems between the U.S. and Israel. So a lot of people were freaking out, and it's like, no, the militaries aren't merging. We're not going to swap command structures and like start doing joint operations on the ground. That's not what it means. It means it's like the areas of focus are basically direct cooperation across like about 10 domains: artificial intelligence, autonomous systems like AI drones, and like the dystopian smart shooters, the facial recognition, smart shooters and West Bank checkpoints, direct energy weapons, quantum computing, cyber defense, biotech, and missile defense. I don't think that's all 10 of them, but it's a lot. And it's basically what the future of warfare is going to look like with these AI integrated systems, autonomous warfare, where drones swarms are fighting drone swarms, and like missile defense, right? So it means not just a technological integration, but also an industrial integration. So it also tasks the Pentagon with identifying jointly developed or like Israeli technologies for direct integration into U.S. military programs and supply chains. So one of the big concerns we have now is like, what does that mean? Does that mean that Israel is now going to start running factories in like Arkansas and Mississippi and be able to have even more political influence because they can now say, we create jobs in the United States? You know, that's always been the big talking point for political campaign. This will create jobs. Well, Israel creates jobs, and then they'd have even more leverage on congressional members and senators in which the people are working in their factories potentially. So there's a lot of unanswered questions. The language is very vague, which is why they need to elect a billionaire to figure it all out for us and make sure this integration happens. Because people in Israel are fundamentally aware about how increasingly popular funding them militarily and just like subsidizing their entire societal way of living is becoming. Netanyahu 2 months ago got on 60 Minutes, I believe, and said, and I forget who the interviewer was, but he said that in 10 years,
what's his name? His name is like Major Garrett.
Yeah. He was saying that in 10 to 15 years, he wants Israel to be completely militarily independent, no more aid, focusing on the aid because the aid's unpopular while this whole deal was being worked out. So absolutely insane. My basic advice is to anyone is to not trust anything coming out of DC or Tel Aviv.
Yeah. I think that's, it's like I always say about Israel, it's like they're what is it? Like lying until proven truthful, like the default, but the same thing about DC. You're right. So the default is that like the burden of proof is on them. It's the opposite of innocent until proven guilty. For both DC and Tel Aviv. I think that's a fair statement. You know, do you think that like obviously Trump referred to a partnership, but others would say that Israel is not so much a partner of the United States, but a proxy. What are your thoughts on that?
It exerts way too much influence in the continental United States and our government to be like a proxy. And I also disagree with people who say that, you know, the United States is a proxy of Israel. They're part of the same imperial system that is inherently self-destructive. We support Israel because we use it historically to, well, the part of the partition of Palestine was to like dominate the Arab states and keep like Soviet influence out of West Asia and out of the oil fields and stuff like that. Also why we needed to like coup Mohammed Mossadegh in Iran back in the day, because he potentially could have looked towards Soviet influence. So it's
probably would have just done that if we had attacked him while he tried to nationalize things, which is so ironic. And that's basically what happened with Fidel Castro, who wasn't going to be that communist probably. Although there's a big historiographical debate about it. But anyway, sorry, back to you.
No. I mean, Khrushchev, I think it was Khrushchev who famously said, he's not a communist, but you're going to make him into a good one. Yeah. So back to this. It's been used to dominate the region. However, times change, conditions change, and it's more of a strategic liability. The Defense Intelligence Agency has now listed it as a critical threat publicly in terms of intelligence collection against U.S. politicians, defense officials, military officers, and intelligence officers. Now, this is something we've always known. Like when I went in to get my top secret security clearance, you have to go through like a threat brief and a counterintelligence brief. Counterintelligence is basically like spy catching, right? In terms of intelligence, which is spying. So basically basic counterintelligence brief. And you have to go through this if you go into the foreign areas officer course, where if you're going to work as like a liaison officer with a different military in a different country. The critical threats have been like China Israel and like Russia. At the top of the list has always been Israel. You know, over and above, our geopolitical adversaries, right? And I'm not the only one who's talked about this. John Kiriakou, the CIA whistleblower, talked about this a lot. Like this is like well known within like defense circles that this has always been a thing. It's kind of interesting that the DIA put that out because everybody in Washington like knows it.
Right.
So that was an interesting move. But
and when was that the DIA put that out?
Last week.
I wonder if that's like, you think that's like Trump's way of trying to like call like to scare. I mean, I don't know. Well, actually, what is your insight into this? Because we had Ray McGovern on talking about how like it's not shocking that Israel spies on the United States. It's shocking that like there was a leak about this to the media.
I think there's the leak. How leaking works in Washington is kind of like difficult to kind of like wrap your head around, like whether it was like a systemic like institutional leak where they went to like a trusted journalist, or whether it's a disgruntled person who's sick of Israel and wants this to like be known. And of course journalists don't really publish their sources, especially when it comes to leaks. So yeah, we're not going to know if this was like a official leak or an unofficial rogue leak, but more and more people are learning about the many different ways in which Israel is a strategic liability. One of them is going to be to torpedo this immensely self-destructive war, which has been a strategic catastrophe that has further like degraded U.S. military capabilities, especially looking towards their projected 2028 confrontation with China over the Strait of Taiwan. Probably not going to happen now, even though they were sending out readiness warning orders for something like that in the future. I don't know. Like really, it's in everyone's best interest to make sure this thing goes through. But again, Israel as a strategic liability, it's really hard to see that they will tolerate this without like mobilizing any sort of like controversial attack at a key moment in the negotiations, or just like expand operations, or refuse to leave, or I don't know, pull some false flag type stuff, which they've never done before. And so like better partners, I think, are going to be, in terms of just like imperial, sub-imperial state allies, are the Gulf and GCC states.
It's interesting because you I are someone who I think really does push back on this. You're very not one of the things I like about your analysis is that you're very not America first. You're like openly not America first.
We have Americans first on our website, because I don't know what America is when you say that. Are you talking about the government?
Yeah,
which we all love. So are we talking about the military industrial complex? Are we talking about the AI sector? Like what is Americans? For me, it's working class people who have no political power or political voice as things stand right now.
Right. But you have this America first, I would say, like the Tucker Carlson world, right? Where they like to say things like, and I've had people on the show who would say this stuff out loud. They say like about supporting what's happening in Palestine. This isn't who we are. It's like, no, this is totally who we are. Of course, this is who we are. This idea that like we're an angelic nation committed to democracy and freedom and equality. And then Israel came along and like perverted us.
I'll just remind everybody that I spent a lot of time talking about the history of the police. So, like racial profile and pin mapping and all the highly controversial racist policing techniques. That came out of the U.S. occupation of the Philippines pre-World War I, right? Like after we fought the Spanish and then took over our colonies, like everything we do overseas, every systemic problem of violence that we have in our own country, we did it somewhere else first, right? And so when you say this is not who we are, I guess it's not who we are in the sense that we're not the ones actually directly doing the genocide. Like it's just kind of insane and ahistorical. Just look at the career of Henry Kissinger. Like, are we being serious right now? There's a lot of people who think that like Vietnam was a fluke, but then just look at Korea. It was just the global war on terror, but like, was the Desert Storm really necessary? Was regime change in like Indonesia really a good play. Like,
Yeah.
no, this is all about profits. And it always has been, and it will continue to be unless there's massive systemic change. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of shocking, and I was thrown aback because even before the genocide in Gaza began, like I thought that like the bald-faced level of imperialism that we're witnessing right now existed in history books. I did not expect to see it in the 21st century, but we've all been unpleasantly surprised by that.
Right. Yeah. I just think it's an important thing to point out, and you do it very well. And again, being someone who was within the belly of the beast in the military, I think it's important because and then some people will accuse me of defending Israel. Like I couldn't be more indicting of Israel. I just think it's not, like you said, it's ahistorical and it doesn't understand how power works. If you think that like Israel is this perverting influence on the United States, that but for Israel, we would be on the right side of history.
I mean, it is, but Israel also wouldn't exist without British and American imperialism in the first place. This is the problem when like scapegoating Israel or like getting into like anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, like it's the Jews. You're not looking at systems and structures of power.
Yeah.
And and that's why you'll continue to get played and to fall into culture war games because you lack political discipline.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Yeah, it's a good way of saying it.
That.
Lack political discipline. Yeah. And again, and if I point out that there are Christian Zionists, it's not to protect Jews. I think we should drag all Zionists equally. But if you don't understand the role of Christian Zionism in this, again, it's about you don't understand how it works if you just see it as a Jewish thing. So it's not. I mean, it's so funny. I'm like, who cares about the anti-Semitic part? I'm just trying to point out that it's just not the way the world works. And so if you want to be like speaking truth to power or actually, be smart about it. Cause it's just so frustrating when I hear people who think that they're really see through everything. And then they just wind up kind of parroting these conspiracy theories that show that they don't know what they're talking about. And they think that they're smarter than everyone else.
Well, also, I think we're kind of in an era of politics where hopefully like when someone says something, you can believe them. Like I think observing the U.S. media and the British media and the Canadian media about the genocide, they were like running cover for it, right? And then you'd like watch, Hebrew media or read, even something as kind of lived out as Haaretz, and they'll be quoting officials being like, "Oh no, this isn't a war. We're trying to wipe them all out."
Right.
So it's like maybe we should believe the policymakers, just like we can believe the billionaires, these techno oligarchs like Peter Thiel and Larry Ellison when they say they want a completely surveillance society and they want to live over their own fiefdom. Like, why would they lie about that? They also do not believe in countries and nation states in the same way that us peasants do. This is why Peter Thiel moved his family to Argentina while still talking about U.S. exceptionalism. It's why Larry Ellison lives out in Linnea or whatever his private island off the coast of the continental U.S. is. They don't believe in countries like that. Like the movers of transnational capital aren't like, oh yeah, Israel, oh yeah, America. So we just have to also keep that in mind and not again get sidetracked by culture war issues because it's literally, even though like some of these like billionaires aren't Jewish, they still support Israel for their technological and surveillance purposes because it's the Palestine laboratory and they have a business and monetary interests like locked into Tel Aviv, so it's just kind of frustrating, but everyone's going through a journey.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Welcome everyone, no matter where you are. So, you're another thing that I love about you is how you don't pull your punches, obviously, when it comes to Republicans or Democrats. So there have been some really abysmal responses from Democrats, and we don't have time to go through all of them. I know. but let's take a look at one from Chris Murphy, senator from Connecticut. Let's play this B4, and then we'll have you,
at the foundation to be a payment to Iran to open the strait. The numbers are fuzzy, but it looks as if there will be significant sanctions relief given to Iran so that they open the strait. Now, that is an abomination in and of itself, but it basically renders the future nuclear negotiations a failure in advance. Because if you have given up all your leverage just to open the strait, you have nothing left to try to get them to come to the table on their nuclear program. This has been an epic disaster for the American people. This war has been an epic disaster for American national security. America is weaker today because of this war. Iran is stronger. And while we want it to end, this agreement will be proof positive to the American people of what an absolute dumpster fire this war has been from start to finish.
Uh-oh, he used the word dumpster fire. He's
Oh, no.
real. He's real serious.
Yeah, he's getting real. Yeah. Yeah. He's
Chris Murphy sits on the Senate Foreign Intelligence Committee, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know. I thought he was a vet. I just looked it up. He's not. I just want to say I'm like sick of these like anti-war vets who can't in politics who, you know, can't take a stance against U.S. imperialism, which is devastating for the working class back here at home. They're just like, don't do wars. You know, sanctions are fine.
Right. Yeah,
You know, collapsing governments and causing mass migration crises all across the global South, which somehow people end up here. Weird concept. Yeah, we can't talk about that ever. So I think I came on this show.
Yeah. Last time you were on, we watched him, right?
Yeah, we watched him, and I was talking about the kind of the Democratic establishment, of course, has different like ideological factions in it and stuff. But like it's been this long-standing idea in DC that, you know, some sort of military action against Iran needs to happen. The Democrats just don't want to do it because they know it's going to be an absolute disaster, which means they can get back into power without giving the working class anything, working people anything. Because this war, everything he said was completely true. But that's not the takeaway. The takeaway is we're not going to do anything about it. In fact, if this falls apart, we're going to continue to flame Donald Trump. And by the time this is still not resolved, it's going to be the midterms. So we can just be like not Republicans, give you nothing, get back into power so we can force our own like cultural, social agenda and not really do anything materially for anybody that, you know, makes less than a couple $1 million.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That is pretty well said. I think. Yeah, you should. That would be really funny. You should like go up to people. He's not a vet, but you should start asking, making video challenges to vets, being like, okay, so are you going to condemn the actual imperialism that you participate in? Just an idea. Let's see. You also had some really important things to say about the link between the Iran war and the AI and data center boom. Can you expand on this? If you're watching this now, you're in luck because you got to see that full interview. But if you want to see the full interview later on, if you're not watching live now and you want to see the full interview with Greg, where we get into a really interesting discussion about AI, you can find that full interview at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. We are so excited to bring on our next guest. And if you haven't already liked the stream, make sure you like it. Just literally give it a thumbs up. It's a free way to get the word out about this show and the great guests that we have on it. And you definitely want, we definitely want people to come and see the next guest. Subscribe if you haven't already. As I mentioned, we have streams on Fridays, and we will be doing a debate this Friday. I'll tell you more about that later on, but we're going to be doing a live stream, which will include a debate. So that is going to be exciting. I think it's going to be the first ever debate on the Katie Halper Show. But without further ado, bringing onto the show our next guest. He is someone who it's always a pleasure to speak to. Craig Mokhiber, a longtime international human rights lawyer who served as director of the New York office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. He resigned after publicly accusing the UN of failing to address what he called a textbook case of genocide unfolding in Gaza. And he's also a member of the Gaza's People Tribunal. And he has a lot of cool projects in the works that we may talk about or we may leave you in suspense about. So welcome back to the show, Craig.
Hi, Katie. Good to be with you again.
Thank you. Yes, we have so much to ask you about. You wrote a great piece. You are a frequent contributor to the great site Mondo Weiss. But before we get into that, I think, I just want to ask you if you had any general thoughts about this deal, the Iran deal, any thoughts about the way it's being discussed, anything the media is missing, anything you just think is important for people to know about that, or the latest in Gaza, anything before we get into your excellent piece?
Well, I don't know what's left to be said about this. I think we are all quite skeptical about the sustainability of this, about what will come after the MOU, what agreements will be reached. I think the Iranians and the whole world have seen that the Americans and the Israelis are not trustworthy counterparts in negotiations. This is, after all, the third time that we've been presented with so-called agreements. The last two, while they were pretending to negotiate, they actually bombed the Iranians. The Israeli government is apoplectic at the idea of any kind of an agreement, and it clearly itself has not committed to stopping the aggression against Iran or against Lebanon, for that matter, let alone the genocide in Palestine. And the question comes down to, it would be truly historic if we had reached a moment where the United States government is willing to actually diverge from the dictates and the demands of the Israeli regime and to do something that they don't want done. If that happens, I will cheer, because that would be historic. But we are very far away from the moment where we can exhale and think that this is over. And there are those who suspect that this is another effort to buy time in order to prepare for attacks later, after domestic politics are managed in the way that Trump wants to manage them, after rearmament can take place and the benefit of surprise be restored. So I hope that this is the first step toward an end to the aggression. There's so much disinformation circulating about this in corporate media in particular, which has been absolutely disgusting. I mean, the only people who are more upset about the prospect of a peace than the Israelis are corporate media in the United States and in the West, who are just horrified that we might not be killing people for a while.
Right.
We're up against a great tradition of aggression. And if this were to end it, I would be surprised, but I would welcome it.
Yeah. Amen to that. I wanted to play a clip of Trump responding to a reporter who asked him about the enforceability of the potential agreement. So let's take a listen.
You know that?
Bomb Iran if they don't comply, but there's nothing enforceable in the deal itself. Is that correct?
Doesn't have to be. I let him know. I said, look, if you don't adhere to the agreement, I don't want to do that, but we're going to bomb the hell out of you. And I don't think that they're going to veer from the agreement. What else am I going to do? Am I going to say I'm going to take you to court? Let me take you to court. Let me sue you. No, we're going to bomb the hell out of them if they violate the agreement. I don't want them to. I want them to honor the agreement. Again, the Straits close up. Bad things can happen. In war, terrible things happen. Like you mentioned the question before about a school gets hit. Other things get hit. Bad things happen in war. War is a nasty place. I see it. I see it. I see it better than maybe anybody has ever seen it. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, President Trump. Oil prices.
And of course, oil prices. So what's your response to that?
It's remarkable. Every time Trump opens his mouth, he finds a way to express his disdain for international law.
Right.
And his belief that the way international affairs should be organized is through the imperial government threatening to kill people if they don't do what he wants of them to do. So, what am I supposed to do? Take them to court? Yeah. How about the International Court of Justice if you have a legitimate grievance? How about the fact that your country ratified the UN Charter, which mandates that legally that's what you're obliged to do, not to bomb them? And I mean, look what he's done. My hope is that what he's doing is trying to find an off-ramp, having discovered that, one, he lost the war, that it is not a winnable war, that the status quo ante was better than the situation now after that war, that, God forbid he would have to recognize that the JCPOA concluded with the Obama administration, which had plenty of problems, but was a solid agreement with inspections and everything that one would require. And what has he done now? He's returned to a weaker version of the status quo ante after murdering thousands of Iranians, after massive destruction of civilian infrastructure, after a catalog of international crimes perpetrated there alongside the crime of aggression, after almost destroying the global economy in the process, after sacrificing something he should be concerned about, so many U.S. servicemen in the process, after having lost so many of their bases and facilities, imperial facilities all around Western Asia. If he's still able to see that he needs an off-ramp and this is not going to improve, let him do it. And if the outcome is that the idea of deterrence has been reestablished in Western Asia, that the impunity of the Israeli regime and the U.S. empire is no longer absolute, that's very good for peace. That's very good for human rights. That's very good for international law. But we have to see. I'm not putting on my party hat just yet.
Right.
If I had a party hat, I wouldn't put it on just yet.
Yeah.
But let's hope. Let's hope that this is where he sees the off-ramp and that he has the fortitude to stand up to the pressure that's coming now from Israel proxies in his own government, from Israel proxies in the U.S., the lobbies and so on, and from the pressure that's being put on him by the Israeli government itself, or his ego. He was a beloved figure in genocidal Israel.
Right.
And now they're saying bad things about him, and who knows, with that fragile ego, what that will drive him to do. But let's hope. Let's hope. Always have to have hope. Yes.
Well, Craig, as someone, you mentioned how terrible the corporate media has been on this, obviously Israel, but there are also Dems and, this like Dem diplomat, je ne sais quoi, people like, for instance, Susan Rice, who was actually a diplomat, ambassador to the UN. She's a diplomat, also was considered perhaps was going to be a running mate for Biden. And she just wrote the most hawkish Dem response to the deal. And I'm sure you'll appreciate this because she was, again, an ambassador to the UN. So this is scary stuff. She writes, this is about the MOU. This is a jaw-dropping, horrific surrender document, complete with hundreds of billions in reparations. It is the predictable result of incompetent negotiation and the foolhardy strategic catastrophe of starting and pursuing this disastrous war. The U.S. will not soon recover from this, the biggest national security blunder in decades. Wow, with diplomats like that, who needs warmongers? So, what do you need to see that on the screen, or was it already seared into your brain?
It was already there. I saw it. Yeah, I mean, it's the bloodthirstiness of people like Susan Rice and Hillary Clinton and so many Democrat electeds in the Congress who are saying now, oh yeah, we want to get out of war, but we didn't achieve the illegal aims of our illegal attacks on this country. And so let's go back in there and kill more people and destroy more infrastructure, maybe bomb more schools and hospitals. It's incredible. And these people grew up with this kind of neocon ideology that crossed party lines between Democrat and Republican, and they cannot see beyond it. So, I mean, that's really horrific. It's the hope for justice and peace and human rights does not reside in the Republican Party, which is full out fascist now, in my view. And it does not reside in the Democratic Party, which is fascist adjacent when it comes to foreign policy, at least, and which is as enthusiastic about the crime of aggression, what they called in Nuremberg the crime of crimes, as are Republicans. And even now, you're starting to see voices from the right more and more emerge and saying, no, this is not what we signed up for. Well, you still have enthusiastic neocons, in the Democratic Party. So what can I say besides vote green?
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, there you said it. Max Blumenthal had some interesting comments, much needed comments in response to Susan Rice. Here we go. So he replied, the world has changed since you helped destroy several nations on the neocon hit list, but it seems you haven't. And then he shows two headlines, potential Secretary of State, a seasoned fighter for Israel, considered the favorite to replace Hillary Clinton. Susan Rice has largely won over U.S. Jewish groups with her advocacy at the UN. That's from 2012, from Times of Israel. And then Politico, Susan Rice has Israel's back. And that's from Politico 2012 also. So, yeah, I mean, again, with diplomats like these, who needs warmongers?
Yeah.
But
well, some people who are curious about this kind of thing, where they send an ambassador to the UN that then takes those positions, an organization dedicated to peace and development and human rights and so on. But the US ambassador always comes in just waving a stick. And Susan Wright's tenure there was no different at all. And if you watch the hearings in the Senate to confirm the ambassador to the UN that comes from the US, go back several of them if you want, you'll see that the number one issue there is members of Congress trying to get a pledge from the nominee that their principal job will be to defend Israel from any accountability, to defend Israeli impunity. And so question after question from the senators are there to get people like Rice on the record before they go to the UN, that they will rain down fire on the organization if it tries to advance international law or principled approaches to these issues. And I think she's a true believer in those. I think she is genuinely disappointed that the bombs might stop falling.
Well, speaking of international law, you recently wrote a great piece for Mondo Weiss, Brad, that's CO2. Oh, that's funny, C2. Entitled, "The U.S. and Israeli Campaign to Liquidate the ICC is Working. Countries of Conscience Must Intervene. The recent suspension of ICC prosecutor Karim Khan over allegations of sexual misconduct, despite a lack of evidence, shows the U.S., Israel, and their Western allies will stop at nothing to torpedo any effort to hold Israel accountable for genocide." So could you expand on this?
Well, I think all of your viewers know that in 2024, Karim Khan, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, submitted requests for arrest warrants for Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Gallant. And when he did that, in that very statement, he also gave a revealing warning that harassment of ICC officials has to stop. Well, we know now that behind the scenes, they were being very seriously harassed to stop them from taking any action against the Israeli regime. And indeed, 8 days after that, The Guardian and 972 magazine published this expose showing that a decade of interference and pressure and threats were being directed at Khan and at the judges by Israeli intelligence agencies to try to derail these investigations. And we knew that was going on. And at that point, the court had gone completely silent on the Palestine file. And that silence had already lasted almost 10 years, but it would last for 5 months after that, with this delay in issuing of these warrants. But then almost on cue, somewhere around October of 2024, these pro-Israel publications and anonymous empty Twitter pages started to circulate allegations against the ICC prosecutor that he had harassed a female staff member at the ICC. And then days after that, the ICC announced that Judge Yulia Motok, who was the presiding judge of the pretrial chamber, of the 3 judges who would decide whether to issue the warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant, she suddenly stepped down, citing unspecified health reasons. But we know now they were under tremendous pressure, and she stepped down. Motok was then replaced. They brought in a Slovenian judge. They put the French judge in charge of that chamber. And all of that might be normal in ordinary times, but as we know, this is not an ordinary case, and it's not ordinary times because, at that point, Israel had enjoyed over 75 years of impunity, backed by the US and the UK and Germany and others. And for the first time, it was being called out for its crimes, literally for the first time. It was already on trial for genocide in the International Court of Justice across the town in The Hague. It was subject to a series of provisional measures by the ICJ. They felt that the net was beginning to close. And now, as their intelligence agencies discovered that the ICC was about to issue warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant, they really then closed the net. And what happened ultimately was that Karim Khan, the prosecutor, who himself had dragged his feet on these allegations for a very long time, but now had decided to go forward, became like the target of really enhanced pressure at that point. He was forced ultimately to go on leave pending an investigation. He's still on leave for more than a year. And now if you fast forward to last week, the so-called Bureau of the Assembly of States Parties to the ICC, in other words, the governments, the member states of the ICC, they announced a decision now that they're suspending the prosecutor, Karim Khan, and referring him to a special session of the Assembly of States Parties for disciplinary proceedings. Okay, so that sounds so far so good, but remember, Khan was already under fire, serious fire from the US, the UK, from Israeli spies and government officials, from proxies in the West that were trying to intimidate Khan out of pursuing any Israeli perpetrators for the crimes in Palestine. He had been directly threatened by senior officials of the US, UK officials, including the Foreign Secretary David Cameron, the spy agencies of the US and Israel, and even by an Israeli-British lawyer who met him in The Hague and told him if he did not drop the warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant, both Khan and the ICC would, quote, be destroyed. This was the message. So it's remarkable then that Khan, refused to be intimidated, and he went ahead with issuing the request for the warrants. Well, then Khan was accused of this sexual misconduct in the office by a third party, not by an alleged victim, right? The alleged victim had not gone forward, was not looking to pursue a case and so on, but a third party, who we don't know who they are, brought that together and accused him of workplace sexual misconduct, which made him go on leave pending investigations. Now, what's interesting here too is that apparently Khan was informed that there was this case against him just as he was preparing to announce the arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant. But it didn't stop him. He went in just days later and he announced them. Now, I want to say something here, Katie, just by way of a disclaimer, First of all, this is about sexual misconduct, a very real phenomenon that turns the stomach of all of us and has to be treated in a very serious way. And I know from my 32 years in the UN that large hierarchical institutions like the ICC and the UN, your power is defined by your rank. And that hierarchy creates certain vulnerabilities, and women in particular are subjected to some of those vulnerabilities. And I also know that the ICC has very weak prevention policies in place to prevent sexual misconduct in the office. I don't know the person who brought this complaint. I can't judge their credibility. I can't know what they experienced, and no one really knows what happened behind closed doors between these two ICC officials. And by the way, none of us have access to all of the evidence and documents. But we do know that the Israeli regime and its Western proxies have been all over this thing from the start. We know that Khan was forced onto leave while a three-step process of fact-finding and adjudication took place. So first, the allegations against Khan, by the way, he denies them entirely, these allegations. So the first thing they did, because this charge had been made, it was looked into by the court's own independent oversight mechanism that deals with these issues. And that mechanism considered the case, but they closed it for two reasons: lack of evidence and the absence of a complainant or cooperation from an alleged victim, because this was not brought by an alleged victim, right? So then the Bureau, which is a political body of states, which is dominated, by the way, by Friends of the West and Friends of Israel at this moment, they referred the case for further fact-finding to the UN's Office of Internal Oversight, what we call OIOS. And this is really, OIOS is the preeminent body for investigating these kinds of matters, sadly, because it's had to do so many times in the UN through the years. So they sent it to them to do a fact-finding. And after that fact-finding, they then referred it to an independent and impartial judicial panel of judges appointed by the Bureau itself to determine whether misconduct had occurred. Well, OIOS produced its confidential fact-finding report, just recording all of the allegations, claims, and counterclaims, but it did not make conclusive findings of sexual misconduct or retaliation. And then the judicial panel reviewed all of that, and reviewed the allegations and the evidence and OIOS findings, and it issued its decision in March of this year. That panel of judges unanimously concluded that the facts, quote, did not establish misconduct or breach of duty under the relevant legal framework, end quote. Now, these processes are not perfect. Sometimes people get off the hook when they did something wrong. Sometimes people are falsely accused for personal reasons or for political reasons. But this process had concluded, and it had found that there was not evidence of misconduct or breach of duty under, quote, the relevant legal framework. Well, now the Bureau, this political body of states, picks it up again. And as I said, they are dominated by Western governments. And they decided in April that they would completely disregard the findings of the investigation of the judicial panel, and they would proceed with a disciplinary process against Khan anyway. Remember, this is keeping him away from his duties as prosecutor, including in the Palestine case, and the delays have been really crippling for the court because of that. So now this body of member states called the Bureau, they issued a second decision 8 or 9 days ago, referring Khan to the full assembly for disciplinary procedures. Now, a lot of people who follow the court were stunned by this because of the open disregard for the findings of the investigative bodies, some procedural irregularities, the appearance of political bias given the makeup of this political body, and the decade-long context of efforts by Israel and the US and UK and others to prevent the ICC from holding Israelis accountable. So a lot of observers look at this, and what they suspect is that the obstruction campaign against Khan and the court for pursuing Israeli perpetrators, and then the contemporaneous issue of these decisions by these governments is more than just coincidental.
Right.
Yeah, let me stop there. We can say more as we go forward.
Well, no, what also makes this so rich is that, we're talking about Israel, which is a nation that constantly talks about sexual violence, rape, with the help of media personalities that you and I have discussed, Craig, including Dana Bash and Jake Tapper, alleged this mass rape campaign committed by Hamas, for which there was no evidence. And now, lo and behold, when Nicholas Kristof at the New York Times writes about the systemic rape culture that exists against Palestinians, something that people like, journalists like Electronic Intifada, people Armando Weiss, people at the Gray Zone, not to mention, countless Palestinians and organizations, Al-Haq, B'Tselem, the Israeli Jewish one, which I guess is a bunch of self-loathing Jews, right? According to these people who dismiss everything as anti-Semitism. So finally, because it's in a mainstream outlet like the New York Times, people start kind of pushing back against it, and it's all a lie, even though it's been documented, and we have on video something that is obviously a rape, obvious enough. It's sufficiently obviously a rape that it's reported on as rape in Israel. You have people protesting the attempted detention or incarceration of the rapists, not protesting the rape. You have the member of the Knesset saying it's, quote, legitimate to insert sticks into people's rectums. So all of that makes this even more disgusting. Just the rank hypocrisy and the total disregard. I mean, just the weaponization of sexual violence, not just as a tool of war, but as a political campaign, being used by people who either engage in it or defend it or whitewash it or cover it up or allow it to happen. It just gives it like that many more layers of disgustingness.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as I say, the Israeli regime has been all over this from before the beginning in trying to circulate these ideas and then trying to weaponize, what's been going on, and with a great deal of support from their Western partners in all of this. Now, this is not, the October 7th rape hoax that was perpetrated by the Israelis has been absolutely debunked. There wasn't a hint of evidence of anything like that occurring. No victims, no direct credible witnesses, no forensic evidence, no video, no photographs.
The witnesses being debunked, right?
Right.
Like either admitting or being discredited. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, in this case, it's a little bit different because this is like an inter-office thing.
Sure.
Where ultimately somebody did come forward, even though in the beginning she did not, and spoke to the investigators and so on. So again, I will say I don't know what happened in those rooms between these two ICC officials, and I hesitated to even speak on this, even though it was it seemed questionable from the beginning, until there was a process.
Right.
Because what I didn't want to do was to ignore the possibility that here there could have been a victim.
Sure.
But then the process was held, and a judicial body, an independent judicial body, said that they didn't find misconduct under the relevant legal framework. And then a political body aligned with the West said, we're going to overrule what the judges said. Now, if some new evidence emerges at some point, or some other process is pursued at another time, and it emerges that these allegations have some truth in them, I'll be the first one to call for Karim Khan's head, and to call for a very quick replacement to get on with the Palestine case in particular, but other cases that the court is being distracted. The court is barely surviving. It's been sanctioned by the US. It can't function as a normal organization with emails and bank accounts and so on. It is under constant attack and threat to individuals, families threatened, all sorts of things in the great Mossad tradition. It was threatened by an official letter from the Senate of the United States, signed by a whole bunch of Israel-owned senators, Marco Rubio, by the one, having been one of them. And it's barely holding on, and now it's got to deal with this. So because this judicial panel decided, and then the political body said, we're going to overrule it, if they had said, okay, we're not satisfied, and sent it back to the judicial panel with further questions and further instructions, that would have been fine procedurally, other than the continued delay that people are suffering from and not getting justice for the crimes. And by the way, we know that there have been a number of other warrant requests that have not been announced for other Israeli perpetrators. People have speculated about people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and others, and some military folks. And those have not moved at all because the court is hobbled. It's unable to function normally. And that's exactly the purpose of all of these sorts of campaigns. But if they had done that, at least there would have been some procedural validity to it. Instead, they simply overruled the findings, decided that a small political body made up of states that lacks expertise or independence, that can't make quasi-judicial determinations, they can't overrule the findings of judicial bodies. Remember, these states represent their governments in the ICC Bureau. They don't represent the international community. They are just government actors. They've had to invent procedures in order to do this. It's not even representative of the full membership of the ICC. It's a very small group. And the current makeup is heavily weighted in favor of supporters of Israel and the US, even though neither Israel nor US are members of the ICC. By my count, more than 3/4 of the members of the Bureau are aligned with the US and Israel over Palestine. The head of it is a European. There are a total of 10 European and Western group members in that 21-member group. There are also 2 close US allies from Asia, Korea, Republic of Korea, and Japan. A very close ally of Israel in Africa, which is to say Kenya, ally of the US and Israel. Chile, which is currently led by this Trumpian far-right and openly Zionist president, Jose Antonio Cast, and who had publicly opposed the ICC for pursuing Israeli perpetrators, right? And angrily so. You've got pro-Israel and Trump-aligned Ecuador. You've got the current government, which might be overthrown as we speak, but the current government of Bolivia under Rodrigo Paz, that is very, very pro-Israel as well. That leaves only Brazil, and Brazil actually voted in favor of the Bureau's original decision to pursue the prosecutor. And that leaves Senegal, Sierra Leone, South Africa, and maybe Uganda. But of course, Uganda's growing ties with Israel are reason for concern as well. It leaves only those few African states to try to stand up to this entire thing and to insist upon fair process. So once again, that means Africa, especially South Africa, is left to hold the line for international law. And of course, regional affiliation of these states is not a perfect indicator of how they will vote. but it is a generally reliable indicator in these matters. Remember, this isn't the ICJ where you have judges from different countries who act as judges. These are political actors. These are just diplomats representing their government. And so, yeah, and I think most important, Katie, is the context of obstruction. I mean, it's just the latest obstacle that's been placed in the way of the Israeli perpetrators. There's been this organized campaign of obstruction and intimidation led not just by the Israeli regime, but actively by the US and the UK. The hypocrisy, these are Western countries that celebrated when there was a case opened against Russia in the Ukraine war, but then were outraged when the court proceeded against Israelis. There's been a decade of surveillance and interference from Mossad and others, pressure and smear campaigns designed to destroy the reputations of people in the court, not just by Mossad, but by Israel proxy groups in the West. Direct intimidation, as I said, by David Cameron and others. Official sanctions imposed by the U.S. on Khan and on ICC judges. And remember, the U.S. had already passed this legislation called the Hague Invasion Act that would allow the U.S. military to invade the Netherlands and to free anyone being held in the court if they were Americans or allies of the U.S., like Israelis. And that has managed to intimidate the court very, very significantly. So that, with that context, we would be very naive if we didn't at least raise the question and insist on a fair judicial process, not a political process managed by state friends of the Israeli regime. Allegations of sexual misconduct or workplace harassment or abuse of power, these are very serious matters. They must be fully investigated with due respect for due process, of course, the rights of the accuser and the accused. But that process has taken place. Imperfect, I can criticize this process, but that process has taken place now, and that's why a lot of people now are speaking out, having held their tongues during earlier parts of this. And I'll just say it again, if more evidence comes forward, or there's something compelling that emerges that Khan actually engaged in some of the things that they have accused him of, then he should go, and not just go, but he should be held accountable, and the court should not be made to suffer. And the people waiting for justice in Gaza or other places around the world should not be made to suffer just to carry on this ongoing campaign to buttress the Israeli law of impunity that has stood for 80 years because it's been guaranteed by the governments of the West, led by the United States. And, this is the scary thing, too, because people say, well, just let them get rid of Khan and replace him. Right. This I can promise you. If they get rid of Khan and replace him, the Western states that dominate the Bureau right now, they will use all their power to make sure he's replaced by someone who will not follow up on the Israeli perpetrators and will not follow up on allegations against the US and UK from their war in Afghanistan, which is what originally raised all of their fury. So, justice has a lot to lose in this process. No victim of sexual harassment in the court should be sacrificed for this, and no victims in Palestine waiting for justice should be sacrificed. And that's why process is very important.
Right. Yeah. And when I brought up this thing about sexual assault and rape, I wasn't like weighing in one way or another about the veracity of this. I was just showing how disgusting the hypocrisy is. But Craig, we also have some breaking news that I want you to respond to. Let's see, Brad, you have an article, right, about the MOU signing. Okay, so this is Al Jazeera. A diplomat confirms that U.S. and Iran have signed MOU electronically. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Ismail Bagay says the agreement has been finalized and signed with the U.S. And also, there's an important, I guess, stipulation or that it will not be. Where is that? Given that both sides signed the agreement electronically, Bagay noted that there would be no signing ceremony on Friday in Geneva, Switzerland, as had previously been expected. So is there any significance in this? Or the announcement about the not having the in-person signing ceremony?
Yeah, I mean, I that makes me even more skeptical of the deal because it looks like an effort to avoid really solidifying this to avoid accountability, to avoid shaking hands, to avoid going, being on the screen for all the world to see. I mean, this electronic signing, nobody witnessed it. They just tell us that they signed it electronically, and I'm sure they did. But there's something very powerful in diplomacy when you get two sides in a war around a table signing it under the glare of cameras. So I think that's a shame. That's not going to be happening. And again, there was an agreement between the U.S. and Iran. It was called the JCPOA. It was being respected by the Iranians, and it was annulled unilaterally by Donald Trump, somebody who keeps reminding us he doesn't believe in international law or treaties or agreements with other countries. So it is important. It is very important that this has happened, and it gives us something to hook onto. But I think we need to be vigilant because this bloodlust of the Israelis and the American neocons alike for Iranian destruction. Remember, Iran is the last internationally recognized government that is standing up against U.S. imperialism in Western Asia and Israeli hegemony, aggression, and genocide in Western Asia. Right. All the other resistances come from resistance groups in Lebanon and Ansar Allah, and Ansar Allah is effectively the government of Yemen, but they're not recognized as the government of Yemen, the UN, and so on. So it's only Iran. And if you look at the drumbeat of history over the course of the last 70 years in Western Asia, one by one, governments of that region have been taken over by the US and the UK and made to be subservient to Israeli dominance in the region. And we just saw another glimpse at that this week, where Donald Trump, told the Israelis and said publicly, well, you should stop attacking Lebanon. We should have Syria attacking Lebanon. Donald Trump said this. He's so good at saying the quiet part out loud. Yeah. Well, people are still trying to pretend that the government in Damascus is a legitimate government. We know well from the behavior of that government that they are there, not even standing up to expanding Israeli incursions in their own territory and the murder of their own citizens, but making pledges that they won't fight back, which puts them right in line with all of the other Arab governments in the region that have been picked off one by one. And now Trump, saying the quiet part out loud, is saying that Syria belongs to the U.S. and maybe they'll ask them to attack Lebanon. So and there are so many landmines in this agreement because the genocide is still going on in Palestine, right? And there are people all over the region, including in Iran, who want that to stop. And the atrocities against the Lebanese are still going on. The occupation of Syria is still going on. The assassinations around the region, punctuate every year in which we live. So Israel is not going to go back to its cage. And any one of those fronts could reignite at any moment, unless the U.S. government, led by Donald Trump at this moment, broke with history so dramatically and insisted on the Israeli regime backing off, and I just don't see that happening.
And I'm sorry to interject, Craig, but I just wanted to show you on that note. Here's some more coverage from ABC, but I just wanted to draw your attention down where they kind of outline. They say, the exact language hasn't been released, but I mean, according to some of these bullet points on the 14-point memorandum, specifically, what I wanted to point out to you was this last point: the immediate termination of military operations on all fronts, including Lebanon. That the agreement says in no uncertain terms that Israel should terminate its war in Lebanon as part of the broader ceasefire in Iran. I think, I don't want to be presumptuous, but my personal feeling is there is no way on earth that that's going to happen.
Well, I think Israeli leaders are already making it clear. I mean, this was really a red line, to their honor of the Iranians. Right. They made this a red line, that the attacks on the Lebanese people. And remember, the Lebanese government is not even defending Lebanese territory, but the Iranian government is. And I agree with you. I cannot imagine that the Israelis, if you just listen to what they're saying now publicly, they have no intention of respecting this, and it would take a real push, unprecedented, historic push from Donald Trump to make them behave vis-a-vis Lebanon.
I'm sorry to interject again, but like you just said, what that's going to take would be, let's say that they do breach this, then if he really is committed to this, then he would have to, not just in language, but to materially push back against Israel. And what does that look like? That looks like, okay, we're not going to send you any more money or weapons, etc. And then where my head goes, and I'm sorry if some people might think that I'm putting a tinfoil hat on or something like that, but I personally believe that tying into like the Epstein files and things like that, like all of the dirt that exists there, I think it's highly likely that the Israeli government has a lot of that material. And me personally, I just feel like that has got to play some role in Trump just at every single turn, just ultimately bowing down to what Israel wants to do. And the best we've got is allegedly him saying, you're effing crazy or something, but materially, nothing ever really happens. And so, it's like, on the one hand, what does he care about more? Does he care about getting this under control and that affecting the entire global economy? Or is he willing to sacrifice all of that so that this dirt doesn't come out on him? Because if he pushes back on Israel, the first thing they're going to do is just release like whatever awful stuff.
Well, I'll let Craig respond to that because I have my own response to that. But Craig, you want to go first?
Well, that's exactly what it would take. Donald Trump would have to say to the Israeli government, no weapons, no money, no veto, no propaganda on your behalf. If you do this, we're out. I don't think there's a chance in hell of Donald Trump doing that. Whether or not there's Epstein compromise on him, and I wouldn't be the least bit surprised. Look at his own administration. The people he has empowered the most are Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, Stephen Miller, who is a bloodthirsty Zionist in his own right, And then remember this: there's now a move by chicken hawk Lindsey Graham to try to say that in any event, this is an international agreement. It has to be ratified by the Congress, which
is hilarious.
Yeah.
And Mike and Mark Levin also, who is all of a sudden they are real sticklers about that.
The war doesn't, but the peace does.
Go to war without Congress, but peace, no. That one we're going to have to debate.
No, and you pointed out that's such a great point that that's my fault for not thinking of that and going straight to the Epstein thing, which I still stand by. But to your point, that's an excellent point, that there's no shortage of political consequences for him standing up there domestically with all of the rest of his administration, let alone like Miriam Adelson, who gave him like how many millions of dollars. Just getting on the wrong side of all of these folks, would obviously be another price he'd have to pay.
His entire deck of donors are opposed to this. His own party, many of them are opposed to it. It's moments like this that you wish the cult would work, that he could just give orders to all Republican members of Congress and go along. But as we know, there is a voice that booms more loudly in their ear than even their master Donald Trump. And that's the voice of AIPAC, the voice of their donors, Israel supporting donors.
Do you think that that's louder? Do you think that that's louder than the global economy and like the oil execs that went to meet with him and just the money? It's like, and granted, there's money on the side that you're describing too, but it's like, man, you're playing around with literally a huge crash of the global economy.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's making him feel like he needs to have an off ramp.
Yeah.
I think he thought he was going to go in, kill some people, declare victory, and life would go on. And when it didn't work out that way, he realized he was getting into something that had its own dynamic, and which really this moment in history may really be something that people study for years, when the myth of the imperviousness of the Israeli regime or the U.S. empire is starting to fade. That if people do resist, they can sometimes actually succeed. You would think we would have learned that from the Algerians and the Vietnamese and others who have stood up through the years, the Cubans, but this is a very clear example of that, which is also scary because, the Israeli government is not a bunch of rational actors. These are really, these are the people who believe in the Samson option.
Right. Right.
So I don't put anything past them, but Trump will stop the Israelis only by doing those things that we've discussed, saying no money, no weapons, no ammunition, no interceptors, no veto in the Security Council, and so on. And I just can't imagine him doing that unless he finds a proxy, unless he convinces, the Syrian government to take over. But already they've said, no, we want no part of this. So, we'll see.
But the thing
I'm sorry to interject. Thank you, Craig.
The thing that doesn't make sense to me, or it's not like it's not at all inconceivable that there's some Epstein compromise on him. But the only problem with that theory is that it presumes that, like, but for that, Trump would be stopping Israel, as if that were kind of the default move. And nobody stopped Israel since, well, I guess Ronald Reagan with that one phone call. But since then, no president has. So it would actually be more remarkable if Trump did do something. I guess what you can say is that Trump is more egomaniacal and less ideological than other presidents. So maybe we'd expect him to do something in response to a country or a leader so overtly like disobeying his wishes. I guess that is one argument to just, to make a counter argument and then counter my own counter argument.
Yeah.
But I also,
it can be both too. I mean, the real life is complicated, right?
Right.
So there can be compromise. There can be hundreds of millions of dollars in his pockets from his donor friends. There can be an administration that is, rabidly pro-Israel. All of that.
Right.
There can be imperial considerations.
Right.
There can be, thoughts about oil, controlling oil. All of those things are factors, but you'd have to be really naive to dismiss the Israeli factor in all of this, which is very dominant in Washington politics.
Right. Yes. And, John Mearsheimer thinks that's possible. Ray McGovern thinks that's likely. And I wanted to end by asking you about, the larger kind of imperialist world dominating context, because obviously Iran is not the only country in the crosshairs. We also have Venezuela and much of the Western Hemisphere. They like talking about the Don Road Doctrine. So I want to show you a video and have you react to it. It's from this Sunday from Face the Nation. It's Margaret Brennan asking a question, having a really fascinating, disturbing, dystopian conversation with Secretary of War Pete Hegseth about the recent assassination carried out by the U.S. In conjunction with the Venezuelan government of Niño Guerrero, the leader of the supposed gang that, by the way, the U.S. helped create, Tren de Aragua. So let's take a look.
Ask you about Venezuela because there was also big news within the past few days. President Trump said the U.S. military killed Niño Guerrero, the leader of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, or TDA, in an airstrike earlier this week. He had been indicted in the Southern District of New York for many crimes. I'm wondering, why go with the strike option? Why not snatch and grab him and make him face justice in a U.S. court like you did with Nicolas Maduro?
First of all, I love the way she's saying, like, why not do the reasonable thing, like snatch and grab? Okay.
I was going to say, we did that. We've shown we can do that when we did it with Nicolas Maduro. And because of that, it created the conditions where, in partnership with the Venezuelan government, and this is a huge deal. I mean, they invited our military in because they have a foreign terrorist organization on their soil in Tren de Aragua, the founder and leader, and we were able to identify where he was and kill him. Just like we would kill Al-Qaeda or ISIS, and we did in the Middle East, we treat these foreign terrorist organizations the same way, just like we do with drug boats when we identify they're run by those FDOs. So that was a great development. I mean, think about that. President Trump had the foresight to seize Maduro, change the relationship. We have a totally different energy dynamic around the world. By the way energy flows today, the Straits will be nowhere near as relevant 1 to 2 years from now. Because of the foresight of President Trump, he's made us energy independent at home. We're a net exporter. Now Venezuela, through our partnerships, now we're killing foreign terrorist leaders who have terrorized the American people. The amount of drugs and gangs that came from
energy
the United States of America,
prices are pretty high right now.
It's a huge deal.
So I don't know that the independence is helping people at the pump.
They are.
We'll talk about that later in the program, but I want to come back to the Venezuela point.
By the way, we're going to watch the whole thing, but just note that her objection is not that they've been doing these extrajudicial assassinations with no evidence of drug dealing. By the way, you're also not allowed to just take out drug dealers, right, in international waters. But that's not what she's annoyed by, or what she takes issue with, or what she pushes back on. It's whether or not gas prices at the pump have gone down.
Given that the U.S. military just carried out this operation, should Americans understand that the U.S. will remain militarily involved in Venezuela? Should they expect similar operations in places like Ecuador and Guatemala, where the U.S. is working with their governments?
Yes, they should. It's called the America's Counter Cartel Coalition, ACCC.
So what's, I mean, he gets really excited about that, but what's your response to this?
Well, I mean, more disgusting framing from corporate media in the U.S. I mean, these people are like ghouls.
Yeah, they are ghouls.
It's amazing to me. First of all of those activities, I heard somebody recently refer to him as the Secretary of War Crimes. I can't remember who it was.
Good, yeah.
That's actually perfect. I mean, the targeting of boats in the Caribbean, those were acts of summary execution. Those are crimes under international law. They're violations of the treaty obligations of the United States. It is a criminal enterprise. The assassination of people that they declare to be, drug lords or whatever the case may be, I mean, that's a crime. If you suspect someone of a crime, you deal with the country where they are. You can arrange for extradition, or they can be tried in that country, get a fair trial, due process, a lawyer, all of that. You don't get to kill them.
Right.
The attack on Venezuela was an act of aggression, the crime of crimes under international law. The attack on Iran was an act of aggression that was followed by a series of war crimes through the targeting and the failure of distinction and the targeting of civilian targets and civilians themselves, including schoolgirls. All of these are crimes. The U.S. government is on a criminal rampage across the globe, from Western Asia to the Caribbean and beyond. The sanctions embargo that they've imposed on Cuba has been an ongoing crime. It's a violation of international law, unilateral coercive measures that violate the rights of the people of Cuba and also violate the sovereignty of Cuba itself. All of these are crimes. And you heard Secretary of War Crimes there use the word terrorism, foreign designated terrorist organization, and so on. This is the dangerous moment in which we live. Israel, the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, and others have decided that the word terrorism is a magic word. And they think if they call somebody a terrorist, international law, human decency, logic does no longer apply. That you can, and by the way, this started a long time ago with George Bush, was carried on by Obama with their extrajudicial executions, all around the world and so on. These are crimes. And so now everyone is being called a terrorist. We just saw, 4 people in the United Kingdom who undertook a direct action on Elbit Systems to stop arms going to a genocide, have now been charged with secret terrorism charges that could send them to jail for a very long time. If you want to prosecute them for vandalism or whatever, fine. But terrorism, this is what terrorism is now. Terrorism is whatever we say it is. And by the way, there's no definition of terrorism in international law because it's not really a thing. There are combatants, there are non-combatants, there's criminal activity. But to call someone a terrorist is not a magic word that allows you then to completely ignore international law and to perpetrate what in the end are atrocities. So anytime anyone hears the word terrorism, stop. To the United States, to Israel, to the UK, any resistance group fighting against racist regimes, foreign occupation, colonial domination, they are designated as terrorists by the US and by the UK and by some of these other countries. But international law doesn't recognize that.
Right.
I get that all the time when I'm speaking or posting or writing about something. People say, yeah, but they're terrorists.
Exactly.
You decide who you think are terrorists. I'll decide who I think are terrorists.
Right.
And these are terrorist actions. These are being this is murder and threats being undertaken for political ends. The US, Israel, the UK are perpetrating terrorist actions, and they have for a very long time. So, and the fact that you have media voices like Margaret there, who, by the way, has never, ever seen a war she doesn't love.
Yeah. Or sanctions. Yeah.
Or sanctions, or, you know, raw imperialism.
Her pushback is she gets upset when there's not more regime change. Like her big pushback with Rubio was like, but you still left some Venezuelan people in power there who were, you know, in power when Maduro was. So what's going on? Yeah.
Right. And you didn't kill all the Iranians, so they're still able to have a government.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, this kind of thing. So yeah, anytime anyone hears that word terrorism, pause, think about who's saying it and what it actually means.
Yeah, and ask them if they would condemn the Israeli government as terrorists, or just take a random act of terrorism that was committed by, you know, a Western power and see how they respond to that being framed as terrorism.
Or consider, you know, Israel murdering people in Lebanon with booby-trapped pagers in a transnational terrorist attack. Now, if somebody else did that to the United States or to, you know, would it not be called terrorism?
Right. Yeah. And you don't have to be a Craig Mokhiber or like a lefty, whatever, describe however you want to define me.
Yeah, Pompeo.
What'd you say?
It was Pompeo, wasn't it?
It was not quite. Leon Panetta. What's his Panetta, right?
Wait, Panetta, yeah. Former CIA.
Yeah, former CIA head said, of course this is terrorism. Which is so funny because I have some liberal friends who are like, well, I don't like everything that they do, but that was really impressive. Like, well, Leon Panetta said it was terrorism. I'm like, well, I don't care.
Let me tell you a story about that.
This guy was a CIA head, so if he thinks it's terrorism, yeah.
You know, I recently delivered a keynote at a big union sort of event, and I won't say which one. I don't want to expose anybody there, but there were two people in the audience who were dyed-in-the-wool Zionists, and they were medical doctors. And when I mentioned this, they cheered. The two of them cheered and clapped.
When you mentioned the
transnational terror attack with the pagers, and these are physicians. You know? And I thought to myself, how do people get to this level?
I know, yeah.
But
death cult.
That's what we're up against.
Wow. Well, Craig, thank you so much. We appreciate your coming on so much. We always love talking to you. Come back on soon. We usually have you on frequently, and it's been a while just because things have been so crazy. So I'm glad we're going to restart this more frequent collaboration.
Anytime, you know, I'm always happy to be in conversation with you, the hardest working woman in the podcast world.
Oh, thank you.
That Katie is, and the fantastic work that you do. And yeah, I don't know what I would do Monday mornings without your other gig, because I can't sit through.
I know. It is a pretty cathartic way. Yeah, and that's Craig is referring to Monday Morning, which is the show I co-host with Aaron Mate on the other show I do, which is Useful Idiots, and that is a great thing to tune into. It's Mondays at 10 a.m. and we watch the Sunday morning news shows so that you don't have to. So it's a great way to laugh instead of cry.
That's a blessing.
Yes, thank you. Have a great night, Craig, and thank you for all that you do.
Thank you so much. Right back at you. Thanks, Katie.
Bye. All right, what an amazing show. Love talking to Craig. So inspiring. Let me just say a couple things. If you haven't already liked this show, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already subscribed, please do subscribe, because we do have these additional streams. And one is going to incorporate a debate, which is going to be really exciting. Also, please do consider becoming Patreon supporters at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show, patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. For $5 a month, which is less than 25 cents a day, Monday through Friday, you get extended interviews, bonus content, behind the scenes content. In fact, if you're watching this later on and you want to see the full interview with Greg Stoker, you can do that at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. If you can't do the $5 a month, but you still want to support the show, you can become a supporter at the $1 a month level. That's literally $12 a year. Again, thank you so much to the person who joined during this show, who we already thanked, and that was Tina. Also, I misspoke. I thank you to the person who pointed this out. So here's what I meant to say earlier. I had a question about the that FIFA, that World Cup game. So well, here's what I meant to say. Here's a video of an altercation between what appears to be some Iranian monarchists and Iranian national team fans during the game against New Zealand. Okay, there you go. There, I said it. I fixed it. Brad, is there anything else that I want to make sure to tell people?
Do you have any super chats, Katie?
Super chats, thank you. Super chats, yes. Okay, thank you so much, Exit X101 for that 10 pound super chat with a green heart. Love it. Oh, look at this. Okay, I really love you, Katie. The video you did on Double Down News, I've shared everywhere because you speak for me. Sandy, you got 2.5 million views. Woo! That's from Miss Blue Ocean. Thank you so much. Yeah, Brad, we got to start making those videos straight to camera. And that was the one that I did 2 for Double Down. The first one did really well. I can't remember. They're both about Israel. Oh, the first one is basically how Israel does not keep Jews safe. If anything, they put Jews in danger, and they're a bunch of anti-Semites. And then the second one was basically comparing Israelis or the IDF for the Israeli government to the Nazis. Okay, Go Stoker cheering from Europe at 2 a.m. Wow, cool. Thanks. Kat, do you know censorship in the live chat exists?
So for this, I would say, if possible, if you could give some sort of example or like a username or handle to kind of direct toward what that's referring to, because with description, unfortunately, my only feedback on that would be, as far as I can tell, the only censorship that might automatically happen in the live chat would be if someone is using some pretty derogatory language that might automatically get flagged. That's pretty much the only time that would automatically happen. The only other time that would happen is if someone is like clearly a bot or spamming the chat and then might either get timed out, or if it continues, they're unfortunately just not going to be able to write there anymore. But aside from that, those are the only scenarios where I'm aware of that any sort of quote unquote censorship would happen. But if you could, thank you for the comment. But if in the future, if something like that happens again, if you could either give a description of any sort of specifics. Obviously you can't probably say anything maybe derogatory, but
you can use a bunch of asterisks.
Something to give us something to work with, like to go look at or something.
But this is a curated space. You know, we have the right to comments that are hateful or
I mean, I know I've said in the past, like I try to go out of my way to like be as lax as I possibly can. Like it has nothing to do with whether or not I agree with something that someone says, because I don't want it to be an echo chamber. So I really try to only do that sort of stuff if it's something really vulgar or derogatory, or if it's someone just like a bot just spamming the same
writing
thing.
the same thing. Oh, good. Look at this. We got another super chat. Thank you, super sticker. Thank you so much. What's NOK? I feel like that comes up a lot.
Oh boy, I am going to guess. Was that like
Norwegian? Krona.
Yes.
I do love that show. Borgen. Is that what it's called?
I know you like your Scandinavian.
It's like politically speaking, though it sucks. It's like West Wing, but it's a good show on like West Wing, like dramatically, drama wise.
I wonder what now that like Trump is like bulldozed all of those wings, I wonder what they're going to call the shows now.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's good.
You know,
Archwing. Thank you everyone so much. Thank you, Brad, for your work. Thank you, Nate. Thank you, Phantom Esfanta, for the clips. Thank you, of course, to Craig, the wonderful Craig Mokhiber, the wonderful Greg Stoker, and the wonderful Jamal Abdi. We will see you on Friday. And thank you, Brian. Another great show, Katie. Thanks, Brian. All right, we will see you Friday. You know what we should do? Because Brian was one of the people I knew from Colin. You've suggested this before. The thing is, I don't have that much more time, but we should do like a monthly Colin, like a monthly Patreon only check-in.
Right. Yeah, I think that would be a good idea.
Yeah. All right. It's basically an AMA.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Brad's going to make it happen. Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much. And we will see you Friday, and then we will see you Tuesday. And we see you every day that we release clips on this very channel.
I did everything right and they indicted me. And I don't know what the I'm doing. Antifa!